There's a moment that defines a man, not when everything is going well, not when he's praised or applauded, but when someone spits venom in his face, when they try to humiliate him, to provoke him, to drag him down into the mud. That's when the mask drops. That's when the world sees who you really are. And it happened to Marcus. Marcus was just a software engineer in a mid-sized company in Boston. Quiet guy, kind to the interns, never spoke much in meetings. But there was this one team lead, let's call him Carter, who had a habit of mocking him in front of others. At first it was small things, a raised eyebrow, a sarcastic laugh when Marcus offered a suggestion, but it escalated. In one meeting, Carter interrupted him with, "Oh great, Marcus is going to give us another one of his genius plans again. Can't wait." Laughter. It echoed through the conference room like a slap. Marcus sat there, frozen. His cheeks burned, his stomach tightened, but he didn't lash out. He didn't defend himself. He just looked at Carter, calm as still water, and said quietly, "Let me know when you're ready to solve the actual problem." That moment, it changed the temperature in the room. People felt it. They saw something strong, something unnerving. Marcus hadn't retaliated. He hadn't stooped to Carter's level, and yet he hadn't submitted either. He'd stood in the fire and stayed centered. That's Stoic philosophy in motion. It wasn't passivity, it was power, pure internal power, the kind the world forgets exists in a man until he uses it. Ever noticed how the loudest person in the room often has the least control, but the one who says the least commands the most attention? Why is that? What are they tapped into that others aren't? Let's go deeper. Marcus hadn't always been this way. 2 years earlier, for which he would have stormed out, or worse, gone home, replayed the scene in his head 1,000 times, feeling humiliated, defeated, but something had changed. He'd started reading Epictetus during his morning commute, not because someone recommended it, but because one night he'd stumbled across a quote. If someone succeeds in provoking you, realize that your mind is complicit in the provocation. It hit him like a punch to the chest. All these years, he'd been handing people the keys to his peace, letting their words control his mood, letting their tone decide his value. It wasn't strength, it was dependency on praise, on approval, on external calm. So he began the slow work, journaling in the mornings, questioning his assumptions, practicing negative visualization. What would he do if someone insulted him in public? What if he was wrongly accused? What if he lost his job? Could he still remain composed, still maintain clarity? That's what the Stoics trained for. Not luxury, not pleasure, but resilience, readiness, the ability to walk through fire with your soul intact. Carter's insult was just the test. Marcus had been training for it all along. Think about the last time someone got under your skin. Was it really their words that hurt, or your attachment to how you were supposed to be treated? What if you didn't need their respect to respect yourself? There's a man named James, a former Marine turned high school teacher in Denver. He told me once, in combat, insults don't mean anything. Bullets do. If someone calls you weak but you're saving lives under fire, who cares? Real strength is silent. James had grown up in a volatile household. Verbal abuse wasn't rare, it was breakfast. As a kid, he tried everything to stop the insults. Being perfect, being invisible, being aggressive. Nothing worked. It was only after he found the meditations of Marcus Aurelius that something clicked. He wrote down a line and kept it in his wallet for years. Choose not to be harmed, and you won't feel harmed. Don't feel harmed, and you haven't been. It sounds impossible, right? Almost like denial? But it's not. It's the deepest kind of self-governance. James began practicing what he called verbal jujitsu. He'd let people's insults pass right through him. No resistance, no reaction, just presence. And sometimes he'd even smile, not because he enjoyed the insult, but because he saw what it really was. A test, a mirror, a moment of truth. Can you imagine becoming so calm, so rooted, that even when someone tries to rattle you, you see through them like glass? Not with arrogance, but with clarity. Wouldn't that feel like freedom? There was a woman in James's class. Let's call her Eva. She'd been bullied, mocked online, torn apart on social media by classmates who never said a word to her face. She came to him one day and asked, "How do you not let it in?" He told her something I'll never forget. It's not about letting it in or blocking it out. It's about knowing that what they say isn't yours. It belongs to them. Leave it there. And that's the heart of Stoic philosophy. Detachment, not from emotion itself, but from the illusion that other people should behave the way you want. You can't control them. You never could. The insult isn't the enemy. Your reaction is. Your belief that they owe you kindness. That's the chain around your neck. Eva began keeping a journal. She wrote every insult down, and then underneath, a question. Is this true? Sometimes it was. Sometimes it wasn't. But always it lost power the moment she looked at it with objectivity instead of pain. What if every insult you've ever received wasn't a wound, but a window? A chance to see what still has power over you and release it. The truth is, most people don't insult you because they truly see you. They insult you because they need to be seen, to feel powerful, to provoke a reaction that gives them a sense of control. And when you don't give it to them, when you respond with presence instead of panic, it shakes them, it disorients them. You're no longer playing their game. Imagine a boxer stepping into the ring, throwing punches, only to realize the opponent isn't swinging back. Not out of fear, but because he's not even in the same sport. That's what it's like when you embody modern Stoicism. You step out of the arena of ego. You become untouchable, not because you're perfect, but because you've made peace with your imperfections. Let me tell you about Sean, a carpenter from Michigan. Rough hands, quiet eyes. He used to be quick-tempered. If a client doubted his work, he'd argue. If someone questioned his rates, he'd flare up. It cost him more than a few jobs. But after his divorce, something that gutted him emotionally, he found himself in a bookstore late one evening just looking for something to help him survive the nights. That's when he came across a book on Stoic philosophy. It was battered, used like it had been read 100 times. Maybe that's what made him trust it. He started small, reading a passage before bed, letting it settle. Then he began applying it. When a client insulted his craftsmanship, he no longer jumped to defend. Instead, he'd say, "That's your opinion. Let's walk through the work together and see what needs to change." He took control, not by overpowering, but by owning his peace. And here's the paradox. The more calm he became, the more respect he earned. People could feel it, the stillness, the depth, like standing in front of an oak tree. You can yell at it, even curse it, but it's not going to move for you. You ever notice how when you don't react, it makes people uncomfortable? That's because silence forces them to face themselves. It's easier for them when you react, when you yell, insult, collapse. But when you stay composed, when you look back with quiet eyes, you become a mirror. And not everyone likes what they see in that reflection. There's a kind of magic in that moment when you realize you don't owe anyone your anger, not even when they insult you, especially not then. Anger is expensive. It robs you of sleep, clarity, dignity, but dignity, true dignity, is found in restraint. One night, Sean was out with some friends. A man at the bar made a comment about his ex-wife, something crude, something cruel. Years ago, that would have ended in fists. But Sean just turned to him, looked him in the eyes, and said, "What's going on in your life that made that feel necessary?" The guy didn't have an answer, just stared. Maybe for the first time he realized the ugliness of his own words. What do you do when someone insults you in public? When the adrenaline surges, your hands shake, your jaw tightens. Do you give them what they want, or do you give them what they fear? That calm, that unnerving composure, that unshakable center, this is not weakness. It is supreme strength. A modern man faces modern battles. We're not defending cities from invaders. We're defending our minds from chaos, from people who weaponize sarcasm, passive aggression, online comments. But the Stoic warrior doesn't need armor. His mind is his fortress. There was a young entrepreneur I once met in Austin. Eli built his company from the ground up, but the more successful he became, the more the criticism rolled in. People called him greedy, lucky, undeserving. Some even made fake reviews just to tank his business. He wanted to respond, to fight, but he remembered something he'd read from Seneca. A great mind is above insults, as a great tree is above the reach of a dog's urination. Crude? Maybe, but it stuck. Eli started printing out the worst comments he received, not to fuel his rage, but to train his detachment. He read them aloud in the mirror. He'd breathe through the tension, feel the urge to retaliate rise, then fade, like a wave that crests and disappears. And over time, they lost power, not because the words changed, but because he did. Ever wonder why some people can walk through fire and not scream while others crumble at the first spark? It's not about what they face. It's about how they've prepared their mind to face it. In our world, insult is currency. It's used to buy attention, leverage, dominance, but you don't have to accept the transaction. You can say, "No thank you, I don't trade in that market." The great irony is this: when you stop trying to prove your worth to others, they begin to see it more clearly. When you stop reacting to every jab, you begin to reveal an internal world no insult can penetrate. There's a type of silence that speaks louder than 1,000 retorts, a type of stillness that unsettles the storm in others. That's what Stoicism gives you. Not numbness, but sovereignty. Years later, Marcus, remember him from earlier, was promoted. Carter, the team lead who used to mock him, was demoted after a series of HR complaints. One day, Carter walked into Marcus's office, tired, defeated, and for a moment, the roles reversed. Marcus could have gloated, could have reminded him of the ridicule, the insults, but instead he offered him coffee. People change, he said, sometimes slowly, sometimes all at once. Carter looked at him, unsure whether to be grateful or ashamed. Maybe both. And that's what power looks like. Not revenge, not domination, but grace in the face of humiliation, calm in the face of chaos, kindness where you could have vengeance. Are you beginning to see what this path offers? It's not about being liked, it's about being grounded. It's about knowing who you are so deeply that nothing anyone says can knock you off center. Because the truth is, insults lose their edge the moment you stop sharpening them yourself. I once met a war veteran named Harold, a man in his 60s with lines carved deep into his face, like a tree that's weathered decades of storms. He told me a story I've never forgotten. During a patrol in Afghanistan, one of the younger soldiers in his unit, full of adrenaline and pride, started mocking Harold's age, calling him a relic, saying he moved too slowly, that war was for the young, the kind of insult designed to strike where it hurts most, insecurity. But Harold didn't flinch. He didn't say a word. He just kept his focus on the mission, guiding the team through terrain he'd walked dozens of times before. 2 days later, that same young soldier tripped an IED sensor. Harold pulled him back just in time. That soldier never mocked him again. I asked Harold later why he didn't respond when the insults came. He smiled and said, "Because I don't answer to children playing war, I answer to the men I protect." He knew something most of us are still learning. Not every insult deserves your attention. Not every jab requires a counter. Most of them are distractions, noise trying to lure you off your path. But a Stoic knows where he's going, and that compass isn't thrown off by wind. Have you ever noticed how people test boundaries when they sense you're still unsure of them? Yourself. But when you move with calm certainty, they don't push as hard, because they feel something solid, something ancient. You don't have to say, "I'm confident." You show it when you don't bite, when you don't bark back, when you don't need to win the moment because you've already won the day. A man I coached, let's call him Brian, was an executive in New York. High-stress environment, every meeting felt like a chess game laced with ego, and he was good, sharp, articulate, respected. But one colleague, Jenna, constantly undermined him. Subtle digs, passive remarks, always with a smile that dared him to react. For months, it ate at him. He replayed her comments at night, wondering what he could have said better. But one day, he heard a line from Epictetus that changed everything. "Who is your master? Whoever controls your emotions." And he realized Jenna wasn't the problem. His reactions were. Her words only had power because he handed it to her. So the next time she made a cutting remark in a meeting, he didn't ignore her. He didn't retaliate. He simply said, "That's one way to see it," and then moved on, calm, smooth, not cold, but untouchable. After that, something shifted. She stopped poking. Why? Because her game no longer worked, because she couldn't reach him. That's how you win without fighting, not through dominance, through discipline. You ever see a lion swat at every barking dog in the street? No, he keeps walking because he knows who he is. And that's what Stoicism teaches. Know who you are, and no insult can define you. We think silence means surrender. It doesn't. True silence, true inner stillness, is a form of control so refined it confuses the insecure. They mistake your stillness for weakness until they realize it's the only thing that doesn't break. But this kind of control isn't given, it's earned. Through the morning discipline of preparing your mind, through writing down the worst things people could say about you, and staring at them until they no longer sting, through watching yourself in conflict and asking, where am I still ruled by ego? One man I worked with, Chris, a police officer from Nevada, had to endure public backlash after a viral video misrepresented his actions. He was flooded with hate online, threats, insults. He wanted to scream, to defend, to tell the world the truth. But instead, he paused. He pulled out his journal and wrote a single question. What part of this pain is under my control? He realized that while he couldn't control what people said, he could control how much real estate he gave those words in his mind. He could protect his time, his energy, his inner world. And in doing so, he found something he hadn't felt in months: peace. What if peace isn't found in getting people to like you, but in letting go of the need to be understood? We live in a culture where being offended is almost a currency, where everyone's looking to catch someone saying the wrong thing, to escalate, to cancel. But a Stoic doesn't play that game. He doesn't let the crowd decide who he is. He returns to reason, to principle, to what the ancients called apatheia, not apathy, but serenity through detachment. A modern Stoic doesn't numb himself. He feels everything, but he's not ruled by anything. When someone insults you, they're offering you a package. Inside might be poison, or maybe just their own unresolved pain. You don't have to open it. You can let it sit there, untouched, undelivered. That's the freedom we rarely talk about. Not the freedom to say whatever you want. The freedom to not be moved by what others say. This doesn't mean you never speak up. Sometimes the Stoic does respond, but only from a place of principle, never pride. He doesn't defend his ego. He defends his values. Think of Frederick Douglass standing before crowds that despised him, speaking with poise and precision, not hate. Think of Jackie Robinson, insulted on the field, rising above with dignity, not because he lacked emotion, but because he had mastery over it. This is what Stoicism looks like when it's real. Not quotes on social media, but stillness in the fire, stillness that says, I'm not who you think I am, and I don't need to convince you. Stillness that stares down chaos and keeps walking. Stillness that turns every insult into a stepping stone toward an inner strength. There's a kind of transformation that only comes when you stop asking the world to stop hurting you and start asking yourself why you expect it to be gentle in the first place. The Stoics never promised comfort, they promised clarity. That's why Marcus Aurelius wrote his meditations not for applause, but as nightly reminders. people will insult you, they'll act unjustly, they'll lie, mock, and misunderstand. But none of that is yours to own. What's yours is your response, your ability to remain rooted, to stay in harmony with your own reasoned choice. There's a story from modern times that reminds me of this. A man named Glenn, a firefighter from Oregon, who lost his brother in a public dispute gone wrong. The media twisted the story. Online trolls flooded in. Glenn became a target just for being related. They said cruel things, called his family names, blamed them for things they didn't do, and for weeks, Glenn found himself falling into that spiral, scrolling through comments, hands shaking, the urge to punch through a wall. But one night, while sitting alone in his truck after a shift, he opened his phone and saw a quote a friend had texted him. "You always have the option of having no opinion." Marcus Aurelius. It stopped him cold, because that was the one thing he hadn't tried, having no opinion about the hatred, about the strangers, about what they thought of him. So that night, he deleted the apps, closed the tabs, sat in silence, and asked himself, what do I know to be true? Not what others think, not what's trending, but what's real within. And what he found was this. The pain didn't vanish, but it no longer dictated his behavior. The fire of reaction had burned out, and in the stillness that remained, he could feel something deeper rising. Integrity. Because when you no longer need to be seen as right, you become free to live rightly. Think about that. How many of your reactions are born not from harm, but from the fear of seeming weak, looking foolish, appearing wrong? But what if you dropped all that? What if your dignity wasn't a performance, but an anchor? When people insult you, what they're really doing is revealing their relationship with themselves. Their frustration, their jealousy, their fear. Most people are yelling at their own reflection, but you happen to be standing in the way. So what happens when you refuse to echo their anger, when you don't become the mirror they expect? You create space. And in that space, something ancient emerges. Self-possession. The quiet strength of a man who doesn't need to react to prove he exists. There was a young woman, Sierra, from San Diego, who was relentlessly bullied in high school for being overweight. Kids can be cruel in ways adults forget. Every insult cut like a blade. She tried to change her body, her clothes, her laugh, but nothing was enough. Until one day she read something that shifted her completely. It wasn't from a modern therapist or self-help guru. It was from Epictetus. If someone speaks ill of you, instead of defending yourself, say, "He obviously doesn't know me very well, since there are so many other faults he could have mentioned." It made her laugh, then cry, then breathe. For the first time, she realized she didn't have to win the insult war. She could disarm it entirely. And from that day, she began journaling, not about her pain, but about her reactions, how she fed the fire without knowing, how she longed for others to validate her hurt. But the more she stepped back, the more she reclaimed her power. Now she's a therapist for teens going through the same thing she once endured. And when they ask her how to respond to insults, she says, "Don't feed the shadows, just turn on the light." It's not just poetic, it's practical. Stoicism teaches you to illuminate your own mind, to bring awareness into the moment when others lose theirs. But awareness isn't automatic, it's earned through reflection, repetition, rehearsal, through imagining scenarios and walking yourself through the response. Not to suppress your emotions, but to channel them, to lead them, like a river guided by stone. You might be wondering, how do I start? Begin the way the Stoics did, by observing, noticing when your heart rate rises, when your voice sharpens, when you replay the insult hours later. That's the moment of choice, and it always comes. The next time someone mocks you, cuts you down, talks behind your back, pause, not to retreat, but to rise. Not to hold it in, but to hold it wisely. To ask, is this insult true? If yes, be grateful. You've just been given something to improve. If no, then why let it affect you? That's Stoic judo. using the energy of the insult to grow stronger, not bitter. Imagine someone calls you a failure, and instead of collapsing or defending, you calmly reply, "Possibly, but I'm still working." There's strength in that, honesty, groundedness. It's not about being above the world, it's about being of the world, and yet not ruled by it. And sometimes the deepest response is a smile, not sarcasm, not smugness, just the smile of a person who knows the truth of who they are, who has nothing left to prove to people who don't even know themselves. You ever see a mountain care what the wind says about it? That's the Stoic ideal. Not immovable out of stubbornness, but unshaken because it's rooted in something deeper than opinion. The man who lives in alignment with his principles doesn't fear insult. He absorbs it, transmutes it, and returns to stillness. That's not philosophy, that's freedom. There's a man walking through a storm. The sky above him roars. The rain slashes sideways. Thunder cracks like judgment. And yet, he does not run. He does not curse the clouds. He walks, step by step, head steady, eyes forward. Why? Because he knows something the storm does not. That it too shall pass. That beyond the thunder is silence. That beyond the downpour is dry earth, waiting. That's the Stoic path. You don't become unshakable by avoiding the chaos. You become unshakable by walking through it again and again, until you know in your bones that no one's words, no one's scorn, no one's misunderstanding can steal your center unless you hand it over. There's a tree I once saw on the side of a cliff in Northern California, bent by years of ocean wind, trunk twisted, bark weathered, but still standing, and somehow more beautiful because of the struggle it endured. It grew crooked, but strong. It survived, not in spite of the insults of nature, but because of them. You and I are not so different. Life will throw its words like stones. People will judge, belittle, attack, sometimes without reason, sometimes without knowing they're even doing it. But in every insult lies an invitation, not to react, not to fight back, but to remember who you are when everything else is stripped away, to remember that your worth isn't up for debate, to remember that the calm you carry isn't passive, it's practiced. That silence isn't surrender, it's strategy. That you don't need to correct every misconception, counter every jab, win every argument to prove you matter. The Stoic man lives in alignment with something eternal. Not ego, not applause, but character, integrity, truth. The kind of truth that doesn't shout, it stands. And sometimes the greatest victory is simply this: to be insulted, and to remain kind, to be mocked, and to keep your dignity, to be misunderstood, and to say, let them. Because your energy is not for everyone, your path is not for everyone, and your soul does not belong in the hands of those who do not honor it. So next time you find yourself in the heat of insult, in the tension of being belittled, laughed at, rejected, pause, take one breath, return to center, and ask yourself, is this worth my peace? Because the modern Stoic is not emotionless. He is emotionally trained. He's not detached from humanity. He's deeply engaged, with restraint, with principle, with purpose. He's not trying to escape conflict. He's learning to rise within it, like a flame that dances, not to destroy, but to illuminate. So walk your path, and let the noise fade behind you, because in the end, people will remember not what you said in response to the insult, but how you carried yourself through it, still, present, unshaken, like the sea under 1,000 storms.